Hey guys, welcome back to Clueless Gamers. I'm Pete,
And I'm Brian.
and we are doing another remote First and 10, our NFL weekly, or at this point, bi-weekly podcast. This is going to cover weeks 6 and 7. If you're wondering when this gets uploaded tomorrow on Sunday, hey, where is weeks 4 and 5? They are there. We did record them, and they are in the playlist for First and 10 podcast over on Clueless Gamers. I unlisted it because at the time that it ended up getting edited and recorded, it was a little bit late, even though we did it before actually the games took place. And so there was no reason really for me to kind of blow up your homepage and your subscription box. But it is there in the playlist if you want to check that out and see how well we did. So Brian, thank you for joining me. How are you today?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
Not too bad. We did pretty good last week in picks. We were just talking about that before we started recording. I went 9-5. You went 10-4. So I will tally up for next week. I told you the kind of percentile that we're in. I think we're definitely above 500. So I think we've been doing pretty well this season.
Yeah, and as you just pointed out before we came on, you think we're doing better than someone who does it professionally, like Colin Coward.
Yeah,
His predictions can be all over the place. So
exactly. So
not
I definitely.
not a huge surprise.
No, not at all. And also, we're not going against the spread we haven't been doing, but still, I think it's pretty impressive for us as well. And I feel like a lot of games this season, probably because of the pandemic, have been easier to predict because there's been way more favorites that have been winning this season. So that's also attributed to our success.
And I think one other thing too is it's pretty easy when you look at the locals and you look at their matchups. You just pick the other team, and chances are you'll be right.
It honestly is the truth. The Jets and Giants have been a gigantic. I mean, even the Eagles, if you want to consider locals, have been a big disappointments here in
Hey, the
2020.
Giants had that game won on
They
Thursday.
had that game, and we're
Got
gonna
away.
talk. We are totally gonna talk about that. But first, we got to get to last week's games. And I think before we started recording, the place we need to start from the last time we recorded, as you pointed out, was we've had another head coach fired in the NFL. We started with Bill O'Brien in Houston. We have now gone predictably down to Atlanta. Dan Quinn and GM Thomas Dimitroff have both been fired. Your quick reaction to kind of how you're feeling on that?
Well, yeah, I wasn't completely surprised. I mean, we know the Falcons have really underperformed here lately. And to me, when you look at the big picture over the last number of years, you go back to that Super Bowl, of course, that we all remember when they blew the 28-3
Yeah,
lead against
yeah.
the Patriots. And as an organization, it just doesn't seem like they had been the same since. And I think one guy who really made that team that year was Kyle Shanahan as the offensive coordinator.
Absolutely.
And since he took the job in San Francisco as the head coach, they just have not operated nearly the same offensively. You remember that year, they were just so great to watch, surgical almost the way they
Yeah,
played
that was the
offense.
MVP year for Matt Ryan.
Yeah, he
Hmm.
was great. And of course, they had all the weapons, Julio Jones and others. It just hasn't materialized since. So I think, they gave Dan Quinn a good shot. I mean, gave
Yeah.
him a number of years to get
Oh yeah.
things right. It never worked out, and I think the change was necessary.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, especially when his specialty is defense, and he was. I mean, they were bottom in the league the last several years now in defense, which is really sucks because there was a lot of promising pieces in that 2016 season on defense. Where I was like, man, Atlanta could kind of go away from their history and really be kind of an old Dirty Birds team, from the 90s, and have some really kind of guys on defense like, a Neal in the secondary. Now they have Dante Fowler, but they had a lot of pieces up front there with Grady and everyone that I like the direction that they were going. And I would say the two things that really killed them were one, injuries. I mean, this team has been not Eagles like, but they've been very injured, especially on defensive side of the ball in the last few years since they collapsed there in the Super Bowl. And two, I kind of think there's this kind of, and you touched on it, this stigma, this just funk is hanging over this organization ever since they blew, that historic lead. And
Yeah.
I think the only way they needed to move past it as a franchise is start replacing and removing some of these pieces that were key to remembering that. And it starts with Dan Quinn and their GM. And eventually, I think in the next couple of years is going to lead to their quarterback and Matt Ryan. I mean, it's inevitable the way it's going. This, in my opinion, needs to be a total rebuild here in Atlanta. They need to change over a lot of pieces there if they want to compete in this NFC South where, we'll see what happens with the Saints in these coming years because this could be Drew's last year. But I think the Bucks are around for at least a couple of years with Tom Brady. I think Carolina, as they've shown, at least to my surprise, they've been way more competitive than I thought they would ever be. They get that defense build up to kind of where it was in 2015. They're going to be another force in this division. So Atlanta, for me right now, is the bottom of this division, and they have a lot of work to do to get back to where they were.
Yeah, I would expect there to be a lot of changes there too. And it's interesting that you brought up with Matt Ryan because I think that a change is inevitable there
Yeah.
at the quarterback spot too. And if you're going full rebuild, it's probably Julio Jones. Who knows if he ends up getting moved
There's been trade
somewhere along
rumors.
the line. Yeah, and
Yeah.
especially because they have certainly other weapons that have stepped up wide receiver. So yeah, I would expect more changes to come from the Falcons in the years to come, and we'll see if they're able to kind of get things turned back around.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's they gave Dan Quinn a long leash, and when you start off 0-5 again, this was just an inevitable thing. I was glad that they did. Not you never want anyone fired, right? You're never wishing for anyone's job, especially during the pandemic. But I think for this organization to move on, it was good to get rid of Thomas Dimitroff as well. I think there has been some draft picks that have been missed there, and I think it's good to start with a clean slate. I mean, Arthur Blank, the owner over there, has not minced words. I mean, he's been very straight and frank to the point of saying that he expects better results, that he wants wins here. I mean, he even said with the interim, coach in Raheem Morris that has now taken over in Atlanta, they were like, hey, would he be in consideration? I thought this was kind of a little crass on his part, where would he be in consideration for the job next year? Oh, well, maybe if he goes 11-0. So this guy has to win every single game. This has to be like a remember the Titans thing here for him to even be considered as a candidate for the Atlanta position. So hopefully that ends up not being the case, as you see how they rebounded there in week 6, getting their first win, and we'll touch on that. But I definitely think he's a solid head coach, and he could deserve another shot. Do they dip into the college ranks coming here into in the offseason? Everyone always throws around your Dabo Sweeney's, your Lincoln Riley's, but is there another candidate that we're not seeing out there, or do they dip into that coordinator pool? I think someone, as I highlighted last time we recorded, is Eric Bieniemy, another offensive coordinator there in Kansas City. If you can't steal him away for Deshaun Watson, maybe he can be the Kyle Shanahan-like guy that can get the best out of Matt Ryan, because he is going to be a very, very hard contract to, what is he getting, like $38 million or something a year his option is going to be going up as. So that's going to be a hard piece to move. So if you want to kind of do a mini reboot here, there's still a lot of offensive pieces. Gurley's having a decent year. You have Ridley, you have Russell Gage, you have Julio still. I think that could be an interesting hire. I mean, what do you kind of think about that?
Well, I think Eric Bieniemy is a guy who's going to be sought after. He
Yeah,
has been for the last couple of years, and there's a lot of people who believe he should already have gotten one of these head coaching jobs, and
yeah.
it just hasn't worked out yet. But yeah, I mean, I think most people are pretty certain he's going to get an opportunity at some point, given what he's done with that Kansas City team. It's been exceptional. I mean, they have a great coaching staff overall. We know and they have Patrick Mahomes. It's not
Right.
like they're working with scrubs
No,
offensively,
of course
but
not.
he clearly has been a great play designer and a big part of what the Chiefs have done to be top of the league level the last few years. So yeah, whether it's Atlanta or somewhere else, we know typically in an NFL season there's a lot of different coaching openings. So I would be pretty certain he ends up taking one of them.
Yeah, and maybe assistant out of New England. I mean, there's been rumors of Josh McDaniels maybe leaving in the offseason as well. Could he go to a Houston? Could he go to an Atlanta? I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of Josh McDaniels, but you can't deny what he has done, especially this year. I know they struggled last week, but how they've kind of reformed their offense under Cam Newton could be a place to go as well. I have a feeling Atlanta will stick to the NFL, and Houston as well. They're not, to me, very outside the box thinking organizations. And so I don't feel that they are going to see that talent in college that I think is kind of the way to go. I think getting some of these top tier coaches, maybe a Ryan Day from Ohio State, that's another interesting, I think, prospect there as well, of what he's doing with Justin Fields and what he's done the last couple
Yeah.
of years over at Ohio State. I think you have to you have to be forward thinking. You see more college schemes are being implemented every single season in the NFL. These players are they're more and more ready by the time they get to the NFL. That seems to be the way to go, and not necessarily some of these coordinators that are honestly, they're coordinators for a reason, and they're not supposed to be given that head coaching job.
Yeah, and some end up working out great, and others are complete flops. It
Yeah,
really just kind of seems to be the luck of the draw. A guy like Sean McDermott was the defensive coordinator in Carolina and has gone on to be a
he's been
very good head
fantastic.
coach in
Yeah,
Buffalo. So,
him and that front office in Buffalo have done wonders, really.
yep. And Mike Vrabel, another one who comes to mind, who's really become a successful head coach.
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. And you see college rankings also have worked well. Look at Cliff Kingsbury in Arizona.
Yep.
I'm not saying, I'm not selling the book on his Hall of Fame speech so far, but what they have done this season, what he is rebuilding there, I believe they are still rebuilding this season as well, despite their record. But I think his air raid offense that he's brought to the NFL, I think, has been an interesting college kind of concept, and I love what he's doing there so far, even as a division rival. So, I think that about covers that. But since we are talking about Atlanta, we could touch on their first win. They beat the Vikings 40-23. The game honestly was a tiny bit closer, not really a lot because it was a garbage time touchdown there at the end. But we talked about Atlanta. I think it was a good bounce back kind of win. The first win under the interim. At least they're the only team right now in the NFL without a win is the Jets, so we'll get to that. But they get on the board, they get a win. But I don't want to touch more anymore in Atlanta. I want to get your thoughts on Minnesota. What is going on in Minneapolis? What is wrong with this team?
I think it's a lot of things, but where you have to start is the quarterback position, and I think we've talked a lot about
Yeah.
Kirk Cousins week in, week out, when we've been doing the show this year. And let's face it, he's just not getting the job done.
No.
And for a guy that was paid an awful lot of money, is one of the highest paid quarterbacks, they're paying him as if he is an elite upper echelon quarterback.
Guaranteeing his contract. Guaranteeing it.
Exactly, and he's just turning the ball over way too much. I mean, that game, I think, first drive of the game, he throws an interception that sets up the Falcons in easy position to score. And as you mentioned, the game was pretty comfortably won.
Yeah.
But Cousins just isn't getting the job done. Not to mention they were without Dalvin Cook in this game. He had gotten injured in the Seattle game. So the Vikings have just come up short. I mean, they have had a real bright spot in Justin Jefferson as the rookie wide
Yes,
receiver.
he's looked
He's
good.
done really well. But overall, we've talked about Mike Zimmer being on the hot seat, and this is a season that clearly has gone south for Minnesota, and one where you have to expect change going forward.
Yeah, I think Mike Zimmer for me, that's the prediction. I'm calling it now. He is the next one that is going to go.
Right, because it's not going to be Adam Gase, right?
No, for some reason it should be Adam Gase, and for some reason it's not Adam Gase. They just
So
love him up there in New York.
might
But
get a contract extension.
oh God, I mean, just we'll get to the Jets. I mean, what is happening over there? But yeah, I think Mike Zimmer for me is next. He's been there for a number of years. There has been success, but again, another guy specializing in defense, and a defense that is ranked bottom in the league is atrocious. I think they've pretty much called it this season as they traded Yannick Ngakoue to Baltimore. I think for really nothing. I think it was like a fifth round pick or something like that, or third rounder might have been. It was really nothing. I think that was them selling the season. He was the player in the week one episode that I did with you of the show, that he was a spotlight player for me. He kind of really didn't fit in there in that scheme, and I think, at least speaking personally for me, I kind of underestimated how many pieces that Minnesota has lost in that defense over the last couple of years. It is shown completely. And then, yeah, Kirk Cousins is he's not getting it done. I mean, that was his second or third game of 3 interceptions this season. I think he's only behind Carson Wentz in the number of interceptions he's thrown this season. And they're going to have to ask themselves, they're going to be looking in the mirror this offseason, some interesting questions with his contract coming up of, do we re-sign this guy? I personally wouldn't. Is the Jets or someone like them, speaking of them, are they going to be in the sweepstakes for quarterback? So Sam Darnold could be on the market. Minnesota, I think, is one of these teams that could be in there to trade for a Sam Darnold or one of these quarterbacks, or could be right up there to be taking one of these college quarterbacks themselves because they look like they're shaping up for a top 5 pick. So there's going to be a lot of change there in Minneapolis, and I still think there is a lot of great pieces, as you highlighted, Justin Jefferson. You still have your Adam Thielens, you still have your Dalvin Cooks, and your Harrison Smith. There's a lot of great players on this defense
Yeah.
and offense. There's pieces there. It's just there's some kind of disconnect and there's a few holes that need to be filled. And I just think that Mike Zimmer's kind of voice has run out in the locker room, and it's time maybe to bring in an offensive minded head coach.
Yeah, I would agree. I think change is probably inevitable there. Switching gears, I just want to get your thoughts on this going to another game because this is one that I wanted to touch on because I looked at this matchup last week with the Browns going into Pittsburgh, and I
Yes.
thought that if the Browns were able to somehow win this game, and I didn't exactly have high hopes,
No.
but that would tell me that the team is for real
Mm-hmm.
this year
Yeah,
if
we
they
talked
went in
about
and
that.
got that game. And instead, they laid an absolute egg. I mean, this game was never close. It was a 38-7 final. Now, the Browns still may have a chance to make the playoffs. I mean, they
Mm-hmm.
haven't played that badly this year, but that's a game that kind of tells you this team isn't quite ready to make that next jump. And you've talked about Baker Mayfield, the jury still being out on just how good he is. More performances like that in big games in the division on the road. If he's going to play like that, he's going to prove he's not the guy to take the Browns to the next level.
I 100% agree. I mean, 119 yards, a touchdown, and 2 picks is not getting it done against a division rival. And I think for me, that game establish the hierarchy of the division. I still, we'll see when Pittsburgh plays Baltimore, but for me, Baltimore is just their head and shoulders in that division. I know they haven't played up to their potential this season, but they're for me. Pittsburgh, if anything, that showed me more belief in them. And we both picked Pittsburgh a couple weeks ago, but they showed me that, hey, is this team for real? Because I'm still unsure, right? Big Ben is playing great this season, 11 touchdowns to 1 pick. He's setting career highs in completion percentage and QB rating, all that stuff. But is he going to be the guy that he used to be able to beat a Lamar Jackson, to be able to beat a Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs or something like that? Games like that against a pretty talented Cleveland team show me that, hey, this team could be around. And that defense, led by TJ Watt, is fantastic. Chase Claypool has completely emerged. I mean, there's something over there in Pittsburgh, and I'm sure you would agree, is they just draft wide receivers perfectly. Like
Yeah.
every year they nail that position. I mean, what is it about that franchise?
And you know what's amazing is they're none of them are first round picks.
No.
This last decade, the guys they've drafted all who've made a big impact, what they all have in common, no first rounders. You think about Antonio Brown was a diamond in the rough, we know turned out to be unbelievable
Yes.
until the issues and there's obviously some storylines to talk about with him, which I'm sure we'll
Absolutely.
get to. But Martavis Bryant and Chase Claypool, Emmanuel Sanders, and Mike Wallace, all these guys they've gotten great production out of, and they found them second, third, fourth round. So you're right, they've just done a great job identifying players that fit their system, and Ben Roethlisberger makes it all work.
Yeah, I think there you have still Juju. You still have, I like Deontay Johnson is there as well. James Conner, that offensive line. I believe David DeCastro missed last week, but he's still bound to come back. And that offensive line is really solid. And that defense is, people need to wake up because this defense is for real. The other side of it with Cleveland, yeah, Baker Mayfield, he's in danger. And I know that sounds a little bit kind of too early to kind of forecast, but I don't think so. Kevin Stefanski and the new front office there in Cleveland, they didn't draft Baker Mayfield. Okay, they're not tied to this player whatsoever, and that team has tons and tons of talent. I still think they need a little bit more on the back end of the defense, but on offense and defense, especially up front, there's a lot of talent here. 119 yards and getting replaced by Case Keenum, that's not doing it. And I believe Cleveland will make the playoffs, sure, but does that mean anything if you get bounced out in a blowout in the first round in a wild card game? If you want to prove to me that you could stand with the big boys in the AFC North, that was the game to do it. Even if you lose, I go, okay, wow, Brian, look, they stood up like that was a close game. Getting blown off the field right in the first quarter, I have no respect for you whatsoever. And they might think about it if the season goes like this. They might think about moving off of Baker Mayfield and looking at somebody else.
Well, that's certainly possible. Now, one thing that is worth noting about that is he did come in with bruised ribs and was a
Sure.
question mark going in, so maybe he wasn't at 100% health, though. But if you're out there, you're expected to perform your best, and clearly he came up short.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And also, I just don't believe even healthy that he's the guy. He doesn't seem like I have him on the field with a Big Ben or a Lamar or even a Joe Burrow in that division. He, for me right now, easily ranks as is the fourth quarterback in that division, even below Joe Burrow. He looks small. He doesn't look athletic. He doesn't look like he has the arm strength. He just doesn't. He seems like he's the one holding back this team. And as someone who actually likes Baker, I really want to see him perform, well with all these pieces, and he's just not getting it done right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess we'll move to another game of note from last week before we get into the predictions for tomorrow or Sunday. Let's see. Well, I guess let's take a look at your team because we both called this one correctly.
No,
And on the prediction show on the Sunday night broadcast on NBC, I think everyone except Tony Dungy was riding with your Rams.
wow,
Well, you we know aren't the most optimistic
no,
fan in the world. You were going with San Francisco, so you clearly had some trepidation going into this one, as did I. I just felt on the road, 49ers, they dealt with a lot this year, injury wise, but I just thought they were going to bounce back after getting embarrassed by Miami,
it
which, I mean,
completely destroyed.
inexplicable, really.
Yeah.
But I mean, clearly you had your eyes on this game. What did you see?
For me, I saw a team that was desperate in San Francisco. I mean, they had to get this win. You drop to 2-4 in the best division in football. You see what we're doing if we go to 5-1. The Cardinals are up there 4-2. Seattle was on the bye week undefeated. They needed to get this win. I also think Kyle Shanahan has the Rams number. He just does. With Garoppolo starting, he is now 4-0 against them. It's just kind of how it goes. And this was a tale of tape right from the opening drive. I knew it as a Rams fan. I've seen this 1,000 times. They punched us in the mouth, and that was it. And we were done. And I knew they got Debo Samuel back. You have your George Kittle there, who had his classic game, 107 yards and that 40-yard, touchdown they got. And before you know it, you blink and you're down 14-0. The Rams defensively got punched in the mouth and then played great. I mean, only allowing 3 points there in the second half. They played fantastic, but the offense just wasn't up to the task. You get that, cheap touchdown to kind of sort of get you back in the game to Josh Reynolds, that 40-yard touchdown, in the fourth quarter. But I felt like the offense just never got a rhythm. Goff is just, it's for some reason against the Niners, he just seems like he can never make the plays that we need him to win. The offensive line didn't even really get dominated. It's just that they contained our run game. There was nothing going there. I felt like there was not a lot of creative plays. There was not a lot of deep shots against a very hurt secondary in San Francisco, and really was just overall disappointing. That's a game that you easily should have won, given how banged up the Niners are, and they just didn't show up. Plain simple.
Yeah, so an unfortunate performance there. I guess we'll touch briefly on the locals before we move on. I don't
Yeah.
know, should we give the Giants props for their win over Washington? It was a game that clearly could have went either way. Really, a game that Washington handed to the
Yeah,
Giants.
I think that's a game where Ron Rivera or JoJo's respectively. I think you don't want to admit it publicly, but you're going to be in kind of the top 5 in draft picks, right? Like you really know your season is not going anywhere. You're in rebuilds, and so they had no interest in potentially getting anyone hurt and going to overtime. Washington goes for 2 at the end of the game after Kyle
Yeah,
Allen throws a great touchdown there at the end of the game, and they don't get it. They kind of run a weird play where they have nowhere to pass, and the Giants get it. So yeah, they escape with a win. They played some pretty good defense. They got that fumble recovery for a touchdown,
yeah.
but I don't give them a lot in that win. It's 2 really bad teams in the worst division in football. Yes, glad you got off the schneid and you don't have 0 in the win column, but yeah, it's a golf clap. It's a small little thing there, and that's all I could really give them.
A golf clap is a good way
Yeah.
to put it. The Jets get no such golf clap
No.
because it was another embarrassing showing They didn't put a point on the board against the Miami Dolphins. Sam Darnold's been banged up, so we've seen Joe Flacco the last couple games. It's
Unfortunately.
I don't even know if it's a downgrade at all. It's just the same Jets. They're inept in every possible way. What else can you say? Le'Veon Bell is now off the team. He joins the Chiefs. He's the
Ugh,
luckiest guy in the world.
yep.
And
That's another thing that
oh,
happened since our last podcast.
right. So I mean, this team. I don't know what you say about them. I don't know where they turn. Clearly, it's going to be years before they become anything resembling relevant. Even if they draft Trevor Lawrence, what gives you any confidence that he's going to be able to turn this team around if he has absolutely nothing to work with? I don't care how talented he is.
Yep.
So, I mean, to me, the Jets are in total disarray and are boons away from being anything close to relevant.
Yeah, I completely agree. They are by and far, for me and probably most people, the worst division. I mean, the worst team in NFL. They're the worst team in football.
Probably the worst team in a long time.
They might be one of the worst teams and most poorly run franchises in American professional sports right now. I mean, they're horrific. There is something deeply rotten inside that organization, and I touched on this last time. It starts with the ownership and Woody Johnson. They've just not got it right in the front office. They've not got it right with the coaching staff. We talked earlier. How does Adam Gase still? How is he still employed? Why can his key card work into the New York Jets facility is beyond me. I have no idea how that is still a thing. You're down 24-0 against Miami, which I know Fitzpatrick is hit and miss, but he was having a good day. But still, that's inexcusable. The standout stat for me in that game was it was late until the third quarter that the Jets converted a third down. A
Yeah.
third down. They were like
Hmm.
0 for 11 up until that point. They were about to set an NFL record. I mean, that is extraordinary that Joe Flacco goes into that quarter with like 55 passing yards. I mean, they are completely inept on offense. There is something deeply wrong in that organization. And it's been unconfirmed. Supposedly there's been rumors that maybe Trevor Lawrence said something along the lines of, if the Jets end up with the number 1 overall pick, he will go back to Clemson for his senior
Honestly, I
year.
wouldn't blame him.
Could you blame him? I wouldn't blame him at all, because I think no matter it's Trevor Lawrence, it's Andrew Luck, it's John Elway, Peyton Manning, whoever, I don't think anyone can save this franchise. Not one player is saving that franchise right now.
Uh,
And do you want to risk your career by going to New York? That's how bad this franchise is right now.
I agree. You can't have any one player be the savior. It's
No.
it's going to take a total rebuild effort. They have a somewhat new GM in. It's Joe Douglas's task to somehow get this thing turned around. You try to make small increments year by year, but it's going to be a long time.
I don't even know where you start. I mean, do you start at offensive line, I guess, but you drafted Mekhi Becton at 11 overall this year. He's kind of been in and out of the lineup. Does he look a little bit overweight? They played him in that Thursday night game against Denver where he was clearly hurt, and they still put him in the lineup anyway. He goes out in the first quarter. I mean, right there's a poorly run of, like, why as a coaching staff, we talked about that last time, would you expose him that? Is he the guy? You need probably 4 other players on that offensive line. Is terrible. And then I guess we should touch on. I want to hear your thoughts. I mean, you probably are happy for Le'Veon Bell, but what was your reaction when you heard that news that the Jets released him?
Well, earlier on we had heard that they were trying to trade him, and
Yeah,
so you thought maybe they could find a way to salvage something, even if it's a fifth or sixth round pick, anything. But clearly there were no takers. There wasn't any team that wanted to give up anything substantial, and so the Jets just went ahead and cut him loose. And I mean, you just think about that free agent signing at the time. There was some buzz about it,
yeah,
considering all he accomplished with Pittsburgh. I mean, clearly the year off, I think, affected him. He wasn't the same player last year. There just wasn't the same burst. He ran for whatever it was, 3.5 yards a carry, maybe
yeah.
not even. So clearly just was a shell of his former self. And it was a signing that just didn't work out. I mean, I have to say I was a little surprised they just outright cut him, but when there were no takers for the trade, I guess that was the only option that was left. And then for him to land with a Super Bowl
Yeah, of
contender, I
course,
mean,
right?
it's
Of course.
like best case scenario for him.
Yeah, I mean, what more firepower does Kansas City need over there? Sure, you have Damian Williams, and now you have Hilaire, Edwards Hilaire. Now let's add Bell. We have that whole receiving group and Travis Kelsey, Patrick Mahomes. I mean, why not? Why not? Let's put an all pro over there, in the best team and the best offense in football. So I was not surprised that he landed there. I am happy for him. We'll see if he can kind of revive his career, because I do think he lost some of that burst. He lost some of the drive, honestly, I think. But who wouldn't, playing on the New York Jets? And I think the telling sign was he supposedly had a meeting a couple nights before they ended up releasing him, and he was upset about his usage in the offense with Adam Gase. Adam Gase apparently said that, yeah, it wasn't really going to change, and that's when he asked for a trade. There was no takers with that contract, and then they end up having dead cap, basically, and they end up eating that part of that contract and just outright release him. It just speaks to the organization with the Jets of Adam Gase pushing away kind of star players and them signing players that don't fit, and who's going to also run behind that offensive line. If there's no holes to run behind, if he's the main focus every week for defenses, how successful are you really going to be? So it just ended up being inevitable, and I'm happy for him that he, maybe gets a chance at a ring.
Yeah, and what was interesting too is that we heard the teams it came down to. I remember seeing a tweet that was like he's choosing between Miami and Kansas City, and I'm
Yeah.
thinking this
Why
is a
Miami?
no-brainer, is it
Yeah.
not?
You take a Kansas City all day, every day. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it just, typical of the Jets, and I am happy for Le'Veon Bell. Another game though I did want to touch on though has to be probably the best game of the week from week 6. It was Houston at Tennessee. I mean, that game was extraordinary. It looked like Derrick Henry was playing with a bunch of high schoolers out there. I mean, you want to talk about a grown man out there. That's a grown man. And having his third game now since I think 2018, or since he came into the league, of 200 plus yards. He's just destroying the NFL right now, and I think the Titans proved to me. I know it's Houston, but I think every week they're proving to me they're for real. Ryan Tannehill's for real. He seems like the perfect fit, and I'm loving what Mike Vrabel is doing with this team.
They really have done a great job, and Tannehill's playing like a top 10 quarterback in the league. And, you
Yeah,
talk about Derrick Henry, you think back to when he was drafted, and there seemed to be an awful lot of criticism about
yep,
him coming into the league, and he didn't even make it as a first rounder. I think he was a second round pick,
yeah,
and I guess there were questions, about his size and would he be able to handle a regular workload in the NFL. Well, clearly he's answered all those questions with flying colors. I mean,
yeah,
the guy's been just total beast. He was hugely responsible for their run in the playoffs last year, and he's back to being among the league leading rushers this season. So it's just interesting, and just goes to show that the draft is a crapshoot. You can think you
yeah.
know what a player is going to be, and then it turns out to be completely wrong.
Yeah, and I also think that yes, it is a crapshoot, but man, people should we seen what he did at Alabama. We know what Nick
Yeah,
Saban does. People should have seen what this guy could be. He was the backup to DeMarco Murray that in Tennessee over there, and now he has finally emerged as King Henry, as the beast. I love all those players. I think AJ Brown has been great coming back of injury. He, as a second-year player, he really adds a lot of juice to that offensive core and that wide receiving core. So I really love him. And there's some pieces that I would like. I would like Tennessee to get a little bit more of a pass rush and be a little bit more consistent and start getting some sack numbers, with Harold Jones and the likes. But that's really the only weak spot I see on this team right now, and it just has to do with, can Ryan Tannehill keep this level of play? But there's something about Mike Vrabel and kind of the relationship he seemingly has with his players here, that it's something to watch and it's something to root for, and I love the culture that he has built over there. They're just the class of the AFC South right now, which I'm not saying that says that a ton, but for me, they're a definite threat in the playoffs to Kansas City or Baltimore.
Oh, I agree. And you think about the Titans and the way they've evolved, because this is a team that consistently is just a quick World Series update here. The Rays just got a walk-off win, so
Hey, there you
amazing
go.
game 4. Um, but the Titans consistently years ago it was kind of an 8-8, 7-19. They were
Yep.
just stuck in mediocrity seemingly for so long. I don't think there's another team out there that's had a bigger turnaround over the
No.
last few years than these Tennessee
Maybe
Titans. And you're
Buffalo?
right. Yeah,
Yeah, probably them.
maybe Buffalo, but what Mike Vrabel's been able to do, the playing career he had with New England, and then being a defensive coordinator working in Houston, I believe, before coming to
Yes.
Tennessee, and he's changed the culture there and made them now a top level team, which is it's been impressive to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other side of it as well is Deshaun Watson was great. Um, he can do a lot if Will Fuller can stay healthy. I really like him at the wide receiver piece, but there's still offensive pieces missing on this team. They still need to improve the offensive line, and this defense is bottom two in the league, right up there with Dallas. I believe Dallas gives up more yards, but Houston gives up more points. I think they give up the most points this season of any defense in the NFL. That's a complete rebuild on that side of the ball. And, with interim head coach, Romeo Connell, we'll see if he stays or they go somewhere. We talked about that last week, but it was a classic shootout, a big, kind of division game. If you don't know which side kind of it can go, because those games get funky. And it was nice to see Tennessee kind of pull it out and hold their medal there in that game. Great, fantastic game that was.
Yeah, it came right down to the end, and yeah, like you said, credit Houston for keeping up with them, and what's so overall been a disappointing year for them. But
Yeah,
they proved they were up for the task. Divisional games can always seemingly go either
always.
way. You think they're going to be. I mean, just look at the Raiders going into Kansas City a
Right.
couple weeks ago and winning. So it's because of the familiarity these teams have with each other that's why you can get some upsets in those matchups.
Oh yeah, definitely. And that 94-yard run that Henry had is definitely going to be one of the big highlights of the season. And then he starts off overtime. Deshaun didn't even get to see the ball because he starts off with that big screen catch that he takes out wide, and then finishes the game with the rushing touchdown. Just overall great performance for Tennessee and Derrick Henry.
And in overtime, I believe scoring out of the Wildcat, right? He took the direct
He did.
snap
Yeah,
and
they
ran it
set
into the end
Tannehill
zone.
outside. Yeah, he did. Yeah, that was great. The only, I think, other game, unless there's a game that you want to highlight from week 6, do you want to take maybe the Packers and Tampa? And I have one other game. Do you want to do that?
Sure.
So
That's a fascinating one. I'm glad you assigned me that one because
yes,
it was the game of the week on Fox. I was watching a good part of it, especially at the start, because we know it turned into a romp. But I mean, you talk about a game completely turning on a dime. The Packers start out this game basically in cruise control, and you think they're well on their way here. They're up
yep.
10-0. Rodgers is moving the ball. The Bucks weren't doing much of anything on offense, and then you get the pick six from Rodgers, which
First
had
turnover of the
happened
year.
right. And I mean, you can probably count on one hand the amount of times he's thrown a pick six in his career.
Yeah.
He's just that good at taking care of the football, and that just completely turned this game around. He winds up throwing another interception on the next drive, sets up an easy score. The Bucks go in front, and from then on, they just take off. I mean, Brady had a pretty pedestrian passing total because he didn't really need to do a whole lot. But I mean, I was just fascinating to see how that game turned on one play, and that's sometimes what it takes. The Bucks defense getting that pick six by a pretty unknown corner there really had a moment, and then turning it into a 38-10 romp. Clearly impressive by Tampa, who's proving after a little bit of a rocky start, where we talked about the Bucks needing a chance for Brady to get on the same page with his receivers and the new system there. It seems like they've found a rhythm there and are going to be a force to be reckoned with as we go into the playoffs.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I still think they have work to do as a team and as a cohesive unit, especially on offense. I mean, this defense is really good, and they showed that last year. It was just kind of Jameis Winston was taking them out of games with all the interceptions. But yeah, Brady 166 yards, nothing crazy. Ronald Jones was really good on the ground. He had like 105, 107 yards. Old Gronk in this game. He led them in
Yeah,
receptions, had like 76 yards or something like that. He looked pretty good. I don't know if he'll be able to produce that every week, but it's nice that he shows up every now and again. And yeah, the game turned on a dime. You could feel it through your TV as I was watching it. When Rodgers threw that second pick, you felt the entire game changed on back-to-back drives just like that. The first two turnovers and first two picks for Green Bay and for Aaron Rodgers respectively this season, and he kind of just the offense especially kind of just gave up after that. Like it was almost like they admitted defeat even when the game was 10-7, and it ends up being, 38 unanswered points. They get completely blown out. It was almost unwatchable really kind of in the second half. There was no point to watch the rest of the game. They were just listless on offense, and yeah, it was not a great. It was the first really bad game of Rodgers this season. Only 160 yards, really did nothing. Um, kind of
Probably
put
one of the worst games of his career.
Yeah, and kind of put in check for me Green Bay. They're still at the top of the NFC for me, but if you're going to play like this against some of the guys that you're definitely going to probably be playing in the playoffs, and you're going to fold as the way you did, not a good look. Not a good look at all.
Yes, so we'll see. They got another interesting one on the road this week
Yeah.
against Houston, so we'll see what happens in that one.
Yeah, hopefully we can get some better game of the week. That's why at least we had that Houston Tennessee game. The only other game that I wanted to majorly highlight from week 6 was New England and Denver. A really weird game, 18
Yeah,
to 12. Denver wins. I believe we both picked New England. And I
tons of
don't
field goals.
yeah, I mean 6 field goals. McManus, helping my fantasy team out there with all the field goals. Drew Lock did not play a great game. Threw 2 picks there in the fourth quarter. Really, the one was a bonehead play that put New England right back in the game. He just kind of threw it up in triple coverage. He was begging for New England to get back, but a problem with this offense, and we've talked about it before, even though I've been impressed what Cam and Josh McDaniels and what they've been able to do over there in New England. There is no deep threat on this team, none whatsoever. And so that kind of dink and dunk, they had on that last drive, they had 2 plays where they were doing, these weird reverses to get Julian Edelman to be throwing passes. That's not the way you're going to consistently win games against a decent Denver defense there. I know they're banged up, but they're still pretty good over there. And to not get any momentum, to have 3 points going into the kind of the fourth quarter, it wasn't a good look for New England. A game you really got to win against a bottom 5, at least bottom 10 team in the league in Denver right now. And that kind of put in check for me, hey, is New England for real now dropping to 2-3, or should I not consider them one of the top 5, 5 or 6 teams in the AFC? I mean, kind of where are you feeling right now on New England? Where do you come down on them?
Yeah, I had the same kind of thoughts. I don't think we exactly know what they are, which is so unusual with the Patriots, where you just know going in they're going to be at least double-digit wins, and they always have a chance to win the whole thing. Now, last year
Yeah.
they kind of fell apart at the end of the year. The offense just wasn't working. Brady looked old, and we know the playoff game they flamed out against Tennessee. But yeah, I think the questions you have about the offense are legitimate. Is this team going to be able to put up enough points? And Cam Newton got a lot of praise early on in the season, and somewhat rightfully so. He had a couple good games, but is he all the way back? I mean, there were a lot of injuries he dealt with the last couple of years in Carolina. I think it is still fair to wonder, and the question of do they have enough offensive weaponry, which I think the answer has to be no
No,
at this point. And
no.
so I don't look at this team as a legitimate threat in the AFC, which is saying something for the Patriots because we are not accustomed to that.
No, and when your main and really only consistent offensive weapon is James White out of the backfield, it's a recipe for disaster. And nothing against Tim, it's just you need more pieces there because the defenses will start just highlighting and focusing in on one player. I will give them an aside. They probably would have beat Kansas City if Cam didn't get COVID. And this team was one of these teams that has been ravaged by COVID. Remember, they couldn't even get into the facilities. And so that lack of practice and stuff like that definitely hurt them. The other side of that coin, though, is we've seen Tennessee deal with the worst COVID outbreak so far in the NFL season, and they romped Buffalo. So that's where you have to think about. I would consider Buffalo, and I think you would as well, and most people would, Buffalo a way better team than Denver. And so if Tennessee can prepare for Buffalo after everything they went through, New England should have been more up for this game in Denver. We'll see what happens going forward. They have a very tough stretch coming up that we will highlight on, but not a good look if they really want to keep pace with Buffalo and if they want to keep pace with Miami, seemingly in that division. They're going to be in uncharted territory in the 21 years or so now that Bill has been there, where this is not an outright guaranteed championship in that division. They're going to be fighting for it, I think, all the way to the last week of the season.
No doubt, and I saw Bill Belichick, who I always enjoy watching his clips of his press conferences
Yeah.
afterwards, and it's pretty much the same whether if they lose by 10 or win by 30. It's the same demeanor all the time with him. But he was just like, we got to do everything better.
Yeah.
Offense, defense, got to do everything better. So that was his message, and it's rare with the Patriots, but that's where they're at.
Yeah, and with the trade line deadline coming up about a week and a half or so, they should be a team that is shopping for a receiver, a big time play threat. At hey, if a Julio Jones somehow miraculously becomes available, Bill should
Now
be on that phone.
that'd be a
That's a player
huge
that
hit.
that changes the entire conference of the AFC. So don't think that will happen, but I think
Now,
I know they got burned last year with the Mohamed Sanu trade, but a little bit different if you're going back to Atlanta for Julio Jones as opposed to Mohamed Sanu.
only reason why I wouldn't be confident in a trade like that is the Patriots very rarely take on contracts of that size.
Yes, it's true. It is true. I mean, there is other players out there that maybe they could poke around for that are maybe not of his caliber, but you want to talk about changing your life over there as a team that is historically, especially under Bill, has not drafted the wide receiver position well. Trading for it seems like kind of the more likely scenario, that or free agency. So, Brian, with that, let's jump into our week 7 picks. And I guess we have to start with the Thursday night game that already happened, Giants and Eagles, which wasn't a fantastic game. The score 22-21 would kind of give you like, man, this really was a very tight game. No, it kind of got interesting in really the last like 5 or 10 minutes of the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
Really was not a great game against two really, really bad teams and by far the worst division of football. And I will say that every time we do
Oh,
this
worst
podcast.
division probably in a long time,
It
honestly.
might go down arguably as we go on through the season as the worst division ever in NFL history. I mean,
I mean, with the winning team, what are they going to win? 6 games
it
or
might it
seven,
might
maybe?
it could be 5 at this point. I mean, if something like that happens, I think you really need to consider. I know the NFL won't, but they need to consider maybe doing the top 7 teams in the conference because this team, especially if things were normal and you had a packed stadium in the playoffs, why should this team be awarded the division winner a home playoff game? That's not fair at all. I mean, this division is a joke. But going to the game, I guess the place you got to start where everyone is starting, right, is the 80-yard run that Daniel Jones had that should have been like
Yes.
92 yards or 88 yards and him tripping up there and it's going to be a kind of NFL folly play for probably decades to come. It was a situation where, he had the touchdown. He kind of started looking left. He started looking right because he thought people were behind him. And I guess he wasn't as focused running. And he kind of ran, his body his upper body kind of ran a little bit ahead of his lower body. And that kind of he threw off his balance and he kind of comically goes down there. They end up scoring a touchdown, thankfully, on the drive. But I
Yeah.
think that kind of personifies the Giants season, I think, of just this is where they're at right now. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would. I mean, I think the play itself is incredibly impressive for a
Yeah.
quarterback to take off with that kind of speed. I mean, I don't blame him for not being able to finish it off. A quarterback running 80 yards like that, I get it. It's comical seeing him trip on his own feet. He wasn't even brought down by a defender.
It
But
was the
I mean,
ghosts. Remember the ghosts in New York? That's what brought him down.
yeah, right, perhaps. But and like you said, it was made moot by the fact that they did end up scoring a touchdown, a 1 yard score there for
Yeah.
Wayne Gallman. So the bottom line in this game is the Giants had it in the bag. They're up 21-10 late stages of the fourth quarter,
Yep.
and they couldn't finish it off.
Yeah, and it's funny. I was telling my friends, and I'll definitely say it here. It was 4:57 left, was in the fourth quarter when they took a 21-10 lead. And I
Yeah,
said to myself, sitting on my couch, I said the Eagles are going to win this game. Just because that's who the Giants are now. That's just how they are. Like for everything Wentz is and how injured he's been and all that stuff, he's a playmaker, that guy. And there's still questions I have about him, 100%. But he beats these bad teams. He does. I know he does. And I know he got overwhelmed at Washington week 1, but you knew there was just a way he was going to drive this team back. And you knew, more importantly, there was a way the Giants were going to blow this game. And so, yeah, you have the Eagles come down, they score, they go for the 2-pointer, which they made some odd calls on Thursday night. Would you agree that some of those 2-point conversions, they went for it on the 3-yard line instead of kicking a field goal with a weird run play with Wentz? I mean, like, what? They made some odd. The Doug Peterson and the Eagles were begging to lose this game. There was some weird choices there, but I guess it came down to Evan Ingram, right? A beautifully thrown ball by Daniel Jones that Evan Ingram doesn't fully extend. He kind of had his arms like this instead of like this, and it goes right off his fingertips. And as soon as that happens, I go, yeah, I was right. The Eagles are going to get it back and score. They drive down the field. They end up getting a face mask penalty on their center, on Kelsey. Like, you never see something like that. They get kicked all the way out to the 18-yard line, and one of the best throws of the year so far, in my opinion, of Wentz to Boston Scott, a 5'6" running back. Beautiful thrown ball, beautiful catch, and they end up not getting another 2-point conversion, and they win the game 22-21.
Yeah, I mean, or the throw was great from Wentz, and you talked about him. He's a guy who hangs in there. You go back to the previous game against
In
Baltimore,
Baltimore.
they were down huge, and they didn't win, but he got them back within striking distance in that game. And
Yeah.
you look at the Eagles; they've gone through a lot. We've talked about all the injuries, especially on the offensive side of the ball. And Wentz, he definitely has toughness to him. I mean, he'll make plays that cost his team absolutely, but he
Yeah.
also makes a lot of good plays, and evidenced by that touchdown pass to Boston Scott. So yeah, but then you mentioned the Evan Ingram play, and the fact is, if he catches that ball, the
Game's over.
Giants win.
Game
That's
is
all there is to
most
it.
likely over. Yeah.
Most likely over. And Evan Ingram, you have to look at as a big disappointment, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you take a
Absolutely.
tight end in the first round, and he just drops way too many key passes
Yeah.
for a guy who's supposed to be a big time weapon. It just hasn't evolved into that kind of player. And the Giants, that's one of the big reasons their drafts in recent years have been poor. They
Yep.
have not gotten a lot of good players, haven't been able to build this team consistently, and Ingram is an example of that.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, he's kind of that tweener where he's in between a tight end and wide receiver kind of body. He has the incredible athleticism, but he's just not stayed healthy, and he has not made those big time catches. I think the Giants defense actually has made some progressions this season. I mean, they were what, 12th coming into the game. They've played really, really well. I have more questions, way more on that offensive side of the ball. Regardless of Barkley getting injured, that offensive line is really, really bad. That receiving core is not great, and I still have questions about Daniel Jones. So we'll have to track kind of the Giants' progression. At least I'll give them this, that they've been competitive more over the last few weeks. I will give them that. And I'm not going to give too much props to the Eagles. I do like Travis Fulgham. I think he's really
Yeah.
emerged as kind of a weapon there. But once again, kind of a freak play happens with Deshaun Jackson. The game starts off, he gets 2 or 3 plays right to him. He's the energy guy. He's looking great. And then kind of on a punt return there, he gets his ankle kind of rolled up on a play that the Giants end up getting called for a penalty as well. He rolls up his ankle, and now he's going to be getting an MRI. He has a high ankle sprain. So it just, as soon as the Eagles get a playmaker back, they go out again. They don't even have, Jeffrey is not back. He's still recovering from the LaFranc surgery that he had in the offseason around training camp. So I said it last podcast, there needs to be an investigation of the Eagles medical staff. There's something weird over there of why these guys can't stay healthy. But overall, I took away from the game, the Eagles are not saying much, but they're the best team in this division, and this division is horrible. It's just terrible.
When we did our picks for that game through text, I said to you,
Yeah.
I'm going with the Eagles, but I'm not confident.
Yeah.
And that, I think, proved exactly right.
Yeah, proved exactly right, because the Giants should have easily won that game and blew it once again. So at least, hey, we're 1-0 for the week. We both picked the Eagles. I guess we'll jump to some of the other picks, and so we'll start in the 1 o'clock region. So we don't have to stay a lot on Bills Jets. Taking the Bills. The Bills have had a pretty hard schedule of late. It's not surprising. They just played Tennessee and then Kansas City. Both games, especially the Tennessee game, I feel like they were completely dominated. Kansas City game, they really weren't in either. One of the kind of the second bad weather game of the year. You had that Minnesota Seattle game, and then this one was even worse with the rain on the Tuesday night. that Kansas City and Buffalo. Oh no, it was Monday night. They adjusted it to 5 o'clock on Monday night with the two Monday night games. So kind of hard to go up against two perennial AFC players. Josh Allen has kind of regressed, which is not something I want to see when you're playing the better teams in the AFC if you want me to take you seriously, but this is a perfect matchup. I mean, the Jets are kind of the medicine that ails you, right? If you're a struggling team coming in, you need to get yourself back on track. This is the team you want to play, and I think Buffalo is they're gonna annihilate the Jets. Sam Darnold or not this Sunday.
Yeah, and Darnold is expected to play barring a setback,
Yeah,
so we'll see if what he's at as far as the shoulder goes, but he is supposed to be back in the lineup, but it really doesn't matter. I mean,
no.
the Jets, as we talked about, they are what they are, and it's not anything good. So, yeah, this is an opportunity for the Bills to really bounce back and Josh Allen to regain that MVP form that we saw early on in the year and
Yeah.
has been missing the last 2 weeks, as you note, against two of the better teams in the league. So yeah, we're all over Buffalo for obvious reasons.
Yeah, and Josh Allen needs to play better, but that Buffalo defense has gone under the radar as being really bad this season. They have not been what Sean McDermott has had in the past season, so they need to shore up some pieces over there if they want to actually move forward and go deep into the playoffs. Another 1 o'clock game is maybe arguably one of the best games of Week 7 is Pittsburgh at Tennessee. I'm gonna take the upset here, and I'm gonna take Pittsburgh.
Mm,
I like the way they are playing right now. I think it is important to note that Taylor Lewan, the left tackle, the really good and physical left tackle for Tennessee, is not playing in this game. So that kind of leaves Ryan Tannehill's blind side kind of unprotected. And I feel like a game of two 5-0 teams. Remember, this is a rematch from a couple weeks ago where this game was supposed to be played and then the whole outbreak ended up happening. I just think that Tennessee is kind of in a mix where they've played a lot of heavyweight showdowns lately, and I think Pittsburgh, the way that this is the best team that Pittsburgh is going to play this season. I think they're going to show up for it, and I think they're going to prove that along with Tennessee, they're going to be right there as the top teams in the AFC. If Tennessee loses, I don't look at them unless they get blown off the field 50-0. I don't look at them and go, wow, okay, I'm really down on Tennessee. I think this is going to be a potential playoff matchup, and I think this is going to be a great game, but I'm taking Pittsburgh.
that's an interesting call. I'm going with Tennessee, being that they're at home, and we know home field doesn't quite as mean what it does in a normal year, but it still does mean something.
Yeah.
And I just like the formula. I think they have found a way to be consistent with that running game and with what Ryan Tannehill's been able to do off the running game, and even just relying on Tannehill has been a great formula for the Titans. He's played, like I said before, like a top 10 quarterback this year. He's got good weapons around him. They've got a good scheme there. That offensive coordinator, talking about different coordinators who are going to be getting looks as head coaches, Arthur Smith for
Yes,
Tennessee,
absolutely.
done a great job. And so I think this game's going to be really good. I mean, that's what we'd expect, two undefeated teams. But I'm going to say Tennessee pulls it out by a field goal late.
Yeah, hopefully, we hoped Pittsburgh Cleveland would be good last week. That was an absolute blowout. We hope the same thing in Green Bay Tampa. Hopefully, we get a great game here. Both of these teams are two of the three last unbeaten teams, Seattle being the other one, who were on the bye last week, and we'll get to them this week. Obviously, one of them is not going to be undefeated at the end of this, but I think if you have a great game, I'm not going to think lesser about any of these teams coming out of this. I'm really, really looking forward to this matchup. Derrick Henry versus that great rushing defense in Pittsburgh. That's what I want to watch.
Yeah,
Let's,
great matchup. Yeah, and we'll see if the Titans are affected not having Lawan there at left tackle.
yeah, no, yeah, 100%. And still dealing with some of the ramifications of COVID, so we'll see how they work out there. Um, let's go to Dallas and Washington. This, to me, is going to be a really bad game. This is one of the worst games of the week for me. Um,
Yeah.
I've gone back and forth on kind of who I want to take here. I'm going to take Washington, believe it or not, and I think this could. I wouldn't be surprised if Dallas wins. Don't get me wrong, because I think Dalton will play better than he did on Monday night. But I think this could be very much typical of what Washington played Philly in Week 1. With that defensive line, with Chase Young and those boys, I think they can overwhelm Dallas's offensive line, which is very injured, number one, because, Tyron Smith is not going to be playing again. There's a couple undrafted free agents on that offensive line. And I think they could overwhelm Andy Dalton, who is way less mobile, clearly, than Dak Prescott is. He doesn't have the talent of Dak Prescott, even though he's still a solid backup and there's still talent on this team. But what is not talked about, partly because of the offensive line deteriorating, but also partly because the player has deteriorated in Ezekiel Elliott. He has not
Yeah.
been what he has been 2-3 years ago. If if you want to win even a game like this, which should not be hard, but it's still a division game, he needs to step up. He didn't do it last week. This Dallas defense is the worst defense, right up there with Houston. They are the ones, as I talked about earlier, Dallas gives up the most yards in the league. They are, I mean, getting up an extraordinary amount of yards. It's insane what people can do rushing wise on this team. Remember, they gave up 307 rushing yards to Cleveland a couple weeks ago. That's atrocious. There's a lack of effort and there's something going on. You have the reports that came out in this past week of anonymous players saying the coaches and Mike McCarthy don't teach. There's a disconnect there. They're not listening to us. So you already see these rumblings of mutiny already going on in the Dallas locker room, and I think that's just a recipe for Washington stealing one here.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I never
Hey,
would have thought I would have gone with Washington in this game, but I mean, you talk about an uninspiring football team on all levels. That's what the Cowboys are.
yeah,
And that Monday night game against Arizona, for some reason, I picked the Cowboys to win. I guess I thought they still were going to score some points, even with the quarterback change with Dalton, who we know is still capable, but did not have a very good game on Monday night,
no,
and just this team looks dysfunctional in a lot of ways. And you talk about the rumblings. Once you start hearing that with the players
never good.
going after the coaching, never a good thing. Especially Mike McCarthy's just in there as his first year, and it's
Yeah,
already going south. So you can't like anything going on. And Ezekiel Elliott, the fumbling problems, he had two of them lost early in the game last week. So yeah, I think Washington is going to take this one. I think they're going to be able to score some points against that leaky defense. And they just don't like where Dallas is at as a team, as a unit right now. So I'm with you. Washington's the pick.
yeah, and it's a lack of effort. It goes back to a lack of effort. I think Mike Nolan, the defensive coordinator, he's going to end up being the scapegoat, and maybe rightfully so because his defense is underperformed. There's no effort from a lot of those guys that are playing. I mean, typical it exemplifies kind of what I am saying is that run there against Arizona at the end of the game. What was that? Drake, I believe it was. That it's supposed to be Arizona's supposed to be icing the game, and then it ends up going for like a 70-yard touchdown. I mean, how do you let that happen? It's completely unexcusable, and I just don't like anything that I'm seeing in Dallas. And so I think Washington is going to make this division even more snug as these teams get closer and closer together week in and week out.
Yep. And moving on to the next game, you want to go over to Detroit and
Yeah.
Atlanta, another 1 o'clock game. Kind of an interesting one. Lions playing another one on the road. I picked against them last week and I got burned, but I think I'm going to pick against them again because Atlanta, I think, is playing with a little extra spirit now with the coaching change. I think sometimes that can light a fire under a team, and clearly it did with Atlanta. We talked about their performance last week in Minnesota, so I think they're going to make it back-to-back games. They still have weapons offensively. There is some talk about maybe trading Todd Gurley at the
Yeah.
trading deadline. He could be a useful piece for a contending team. But Detroit, can you really trust them on the road? Maybe you can against Jacksonville, who's inept, and I don't know why I picked them in the game. But I think Atlanta makes it back-to-back games. A big game for Calvin Ridley, Ryan, the offense. I'm going to go Atlanta.
I'm taking Atlanta as well. Detroit, if they want to stay relevant this season and have any playoff hopes, they need to win this game. Arguably, Detroit should at least be 3-2. I mean, they never should have lost to Chicago week one, but they've let some games get away. They were up on the Saints, they were up on the Packers, and they've kind of just been kind of exemplifies once again Matt Patricia and his kind of tenure over there in Detroit. But yeah, Atlanta's kind of feeling themselves right now, and in a good way. They're kind of riding their vibes with Raheem Morris, and I think they're going to score a lot of points against Detroit. That's is not a great team and not a great defense. So yeah, I'm taking Atlanta all the way to get a second win, which could end up hurting them if they want to have some good draft picks going into the 2021 draft. We can
No,
go
an
over.
interest.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to go to the another game here that's a divisional game, an interesting one. The Browns in this Cincinnati to take on
Yes.
the Bengals. We know about how impressive Joe Burrow has been his rookie season, but he's on a team that isn't very good. This is a spot where I could see Cincinnati stealing one, but I think the Browns are going to be really determined after laying an egg last week that I don't think they're going to make it back to back. I think clearly they're the more talented team here. And yes, they seem to have their struggles against the Bengals. I mean, they've had their struggles against everybody in
Yeah.
that division, being how bad they've been in recent years. But I just think they're going to find a way to bounce back here and get a key division win.
Yeah, I'm taking Cleveland as well. I mean, Baker's 4-1 against Cincinnati. He won earlier this year. He's kind of owned Cincinnati. That's kind of been his like token point that they always kind of beat up on them in his QB time that he's had over in Cleveland. They need a bounce back game. They need to stay in pace in this division and in the conference. And what better way than beating a rookie quarterback with a terrible offensive line and kind of a really leaky and porous defense they have over there in Cincinnati. Joe Burrow has as we've talked about here, he's been impressive. I think there is some offensive weapons and there is room for hope, but they need to fix that offensive line because you've also seen Joe Mixon has greatly suffered this season because there was no lanes to run through whatsoever. So
And now he's hurt.
and he's hurt. So yeah, I'm
Yeah.
taking Cleveland to bounce back and kind of you'll see them flex their muscles after this game and act like what they are, and I'll be like, relax. You beat Cincinnati. You got blown out last week against a great team in your own division. You got blown out by Baltimore earlier this season, but do your job, get the win, move on to the next week.
But another divisional matchup as we're back underway here after that little stoppage.
Little Charger stop.
An interesting game with Carolina. New Orleans is without a lot of offensive weaponry.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of issues with Michael Thomas, the fight that he got into with
Yeah.
a teammate, and had
They're kind
different
of weird,
injuries.
the
So really,
reports. They're not really like saying exactly what happened. It's kind of they've been keeping it under the wraps.
yeah. So and now I think he's dealing with some sort of injury, so he's
Yeah.
not playing in this game tomorrow. Which I would expect this game to be really tight.
Yeah.
Carolina has been very competitive this season. We've talked about Teddy Bridgewater being a good story, and the fact that this team has stepped up without their best weapon by far, Christian McCaffrey, went
Yeah.
out in week 1 or 2 early on, and they played really good football without him. So that's a credit to the coaching staff there, Matt Rule, what they've been able to do. I think this game's going to be really close. I can't pick against the Saints, though, in the dome. I think it's a field goal game. If I were picking against the spread, I'd take Carolina plus the points, but I think the Saints find a way to win a close game here.
Yeah, I'm taking New Orleans as well. I do think this is going to be a close game. Mike Davis has been the unsung hero of that Carolina offense. He has been great stepping in for McCaffrey, and it creates kind of an awkward situation, which obviously you can't keep out McCaffrey. He has to come back into the starting role, but they got to find a way to get Mike Davis involved in this offense, maybe running some kind of two running back sets because he's proven to be a valuable commodity, especially catching out of the backfield there. Teddy Bridgewater's been impressive. He's going to be going against his former team, but New Orleans, this defense knows Teddy. They went against him in practice week on and week out, and I think New Orleans needs kind of for me a kind of a win, a statement win almost in an in division win to kind of get their season going. Because for me, they've kind of been floundering. They win, they lose, they win, they lose. At 3-2, like there's no momentum with this team. And as Drew Brees is he's leading the league at 71% completion percentage, but it's been a lot of dink and dunk, not a lot of air yards. Really passes off to Alvin Kamara and short inside 10 yards. They need to do something more to show me that they can compete with the Seattles, with the Tampa Bays in the NFC. And this would be a way to do it here. But I still think it's going to be a close game. And I got to take the Saints right now. I have to.
And now moving on to another game, the Packers, who we talked about in
Yes.
their embarrassing performance against Tampa, and now have another road test tomorrow against Houston. And I just have a feeling there's a little bit more issues with the Packers than we were led to believe early in the season when
Yeah.
everything was going well. I'm going with an upset here, and I'm taking
Wow.
Houston. Yeah,
Wow.
going Houston, we saw a lot from them in that game against Tennessee. I think sometimes, you ride momentum from certain games, and sometimes you go through certain periods of the season where it gets some figuring out. I think the Packers are still going to be one of the last teams when it's all said and done, but I think that loss last week stays with them for another week, and it's going to sting. Not to mention that, they're dealing with some issues offensively. Aaron Jones isn't going to play in this game tomorrow. He's a great weapon, not just running the ball, but as a big pass catcher for Rodgers. So I'm going to take Houston, and that's probably a surprise.
Yeah, it's definitely a surprise. That might be your biggest. Either one of us, our biggest kind of upset so far of the season. I'm taking Green Bay. I think because they got so embarrassed on national TV, they need a comeback way. And what a team to play in a terrible defense, probably second worst or right there in top two with Dallas in the league, as we've talked about. Even without Aaron Jones, what is he out with? A hamstring injury? What is he injured with?
I think it might be a hamstring.
It
Yeah,
might. We'll look that up. I'll look that up in a
yeah.
second. But yeah, I think Green Bay need this in a big way. It definitely revealed last week that this team might have some more holes than kind of we thought. We previously thought going in. This defense needs to play better, and Aaron Rodgers needs to stay more in tune and in touch with the game, even when things are going bad. He's able to flex and be doing Key and Peele skits when he's scoring touchdowns last week. That showing the abs and doing all that, and then as soon as he's throwing picks, he kind of gives up on the game. He needs to, as a mindset and as a body language, he needs to play better, and he needs to be more into these games to get all these offensive pieces going, even though they have a little bit of injuries there with Alan Lazar also as out as well. But I'm taking Green Bay there. Houston's going to continue to struggle this season. And even though I think this could be a competitive game, I can't pick against A-Rod. I can't do it.
And that takes us into the 4 o'clock window. I'll let you have
Yes.
the first crack at this one. The Bucks and the Raiders, interesting game. And I touched briefly on Antonio Brown before the news, obviously this weekend, that he has signed the deal with the Bucks, and I guess would be in uniform and in the lineup for this game tomorrow. I don't know if we have confirmation of that,
I
but
don't think he's going to be able to play tomorrow. I don't think so. I think it's going to be next time.
okay, so we'll wait on Brown's debut with the Bucks, but that signing to me proved that he made an impression on Brady in the short cameo they had together in New England last year. And it was only a game or two, but clearly Brady was impressed with what he saw because he was one of the driving forces behind bringing him in there to Tampa. So
Absolutely.
interesting game. Raiders have played very well at home this year. What do you think?
I'm taking Tampa. I mean, Oakland. I'm not Oakland. Las Vegas. Sorry, has
Yeah.
been a very up and down team. I think there is pieces there. That defense still isn't really great. I think Tampa made a statement win that I don't expect them to kind of just kind of fold and retract on. I think it could be a good game, sure, especially if you can get Derek Carr going and you can get Josh Jacobs going and kind of control the ball. But that Tampa Bay defense, as we highlighted, is really good, especially against the run with Levante David and those boys. Um, Antonio, by the way, Aaron Jones out with a calf strain. That is what it is. And Antonio Brown, he has to pass a COVID test, and he also has to serve out the rest of that supposed 8 game suspension. So he's more likely to make his debut against the Saints in Week 9. So we're a couple weeks out from Antonio Brown there. They kind of added a strength to a strength. I understand Mike Evans and Chris Godwin have been in and out of the lineup with some injuries. Scotty Miller's been injured. So I thought that was weird that they would necessarily sign Brown and not try to look and spend that money kind of on somewhere else, maybe at the tight end position with OJ Howard out, but whatever. I mean, he could add an interesting dynamic there. Kind of a shame that Antonio Brown was looking at a couple other places. He was looking at Baltimore. He was looking also at Green Bay. There was reports. Those teams, I think, could have used him way more. But with Tom Brady in that locker room with Bruce Arians, I think that they have kind of the nucleus and the strength to hold it together. It's just it shocked me a little bit just because Bruce Arians at the beginning of the year completely, as being the offensive coordinator in Pittsburgh, he knew Antonio Brown well, completely shut down any regard of getting Antonio Brown, even when Tom Brady was pushing for it. And now for Tom to seemingly behind the scenes make the push to get him in, it does, as you said, touch on their relationship of how they grew in a week, basically. And there was probably some behind the scenes there as well of time they spent with each other. But I'm still, even without him not playing this week, I have to take Tampa, and Ronald Jones has been another unsung hero. You want to talk unsung heroes? He's been running the ball great over there in Tampa Bay.
He has, and this is kind of the old John Gruden Bowl, if you will,
Yeah,
two teams
right.
that he's coached in his
It's true.
career. And, John Gruden can get fired up, as we remember watching him in the Monday Night Football days,
Yes.
and I think they miss him in that, but that's a story for another day. I'm going to surprise you, and I'm going to take another upset with the
Really?
Raiders. I think
Wow.
this is
Yeah.
a team that's gotten up for certain games this year. You think of that Monday nighter against the Saints, where the
Yes.
game wasn't even close. They
No.
just played great. So I like the Raiders in this spot. I think it's going to be a close game. Bucks have played really well lately, no question, but I think this is a chance for a slip up, and I'm going Raiders
No,
in a
it's
close one.
it's fair. I mean, the Raiders, they had that game against the Saints. They had the big win over the Chiefs, so they have gotten up for some games. Total possibility. I'm just hoping for a really good game that I think it could be. Another 425 game is San Francisco going New England, which is kind of a teetering point for both of these franchises this season right now. We're both desperately need a win to keep paces in their respective division. I would say the Niners more so, but New England definitely needs it as well. I'm taking San Francisco in this game. I did not like what I saw over there with Cam Newton last week. I think this is a very hard game. I think it's going to take another week for kind of New England to kind of get back in their mojo, dealing with, as I said earlier, with their COVID outbreak that they had and the lack of practice they've had. And San Francisco, they showed up for the Ram game last week. They're getting more healthy week in and week out. And Deebo Samuel and George Kittle, they lead this offense, because let's not let it go that Garoppolo, stats wise, he looked like he did great last week. He threw about maybe 40 or 50 of those yards. The rest of those were all behind the line of scrimmage or within 5 yards. They were very dink and dunk because he clearly is hurting on that ankle, which is a way worse injury. Apparently his shin bones are rubbing together. So in protecting him right now, and what Kyle Shanahan is doing, the play calls he makes, the game plan that he has going in, I believe he's going to be able to attack a very good New England defense. And this is going to be a kind of close, low-scoring game, but I think the tipping point is San Francisco has way more offensive pieces than New England does, so that's why I got to take them.
The one storyline I think that's kind of gone unnoticed here is that Garoppolo be going against the Patriots
Yeah,
for, I
the
believe this
return.
would be the first time.
Yeah,
Yeah. And he's been very much up and down, Garoppolo. You talk
yeah,
about him not being 100%. Sometimes you look at him and you think he's one of the better quarterbacks in the game, and then others, he makes you wonder if he's really the answer long term after signing that huge contract. So I don't think you know what you're getting on a week to week basis from him. And I'm taking the Patriots, and this is going to be a week where there's some
we
interesting
we
results
got
because
some
you and I are
disagreements here.
disagreeing. Yeah. But for me, what really it comes down to more than anything else is I don't think the Patriots under Bill Belichick are going to lose back-to-back games at home. And the 49ers still very much banged up. They've had two wins on the road, but they're against the Giants and Jets.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is obviously stiffer competition. And I don't really have other great reasons other than I just trust the Patriots to get back on track, that I don't see them losing back-to-back games. I think it's a bounce back for performance from Cam Newton. I think the game is pretty close, but I'm going New England.
Hey, no one is hoping more than me that San Francisco ends up losing this game. But that will be interesting if New England ends up losing next week. We got to look up that stat for next week's show of when is the last time Bill Belichick has lost back-to-back games, especially at home. That's got to be something ridiculous. So we got to look that up for next week. Uh, two more 425 games. One of them we could quickly touch on is Jags at Chargers. I'm taking the Chargers. This is, two teams haven't won since week one. They only have one win each. Jacksonville, I thought, would be more competitive given how they played early in the season. They really haven't. They've been getting blown out in the last couple weeks. And even though the Chargers, LA is hurt, even though they are clearly missing some pieces there that they need to draft going forward, there's still some players on this defense, particularly in Joey Bosa. And Justin Herbert has been a complete, I guess, surprise. I expected him to be good, but I didn't expect him to be this good. He's shaping himself up to be a star and a potential great find for them in that AFC West. So I'm taking the Chargers, and I expect a great offensive performance from them.
Yeah, this is the game that's going to get us back in lockstep,
Back in
which I
line.
think makes sense. Now, the thing
Yeah.
with the Chargers is they're always primed for a slip up in a game that you
Yeah.
never expect. That just seems to be their way for really as long as I've been following the NFL. But I agree with your point on Herbert. He's been impressive to watch. I like the way he throws the ball downfield. He's got weapons: Mike Williams, Keenan Allen. Now they have a pretty good offense. They have a solid team. I feel like they should be better than they
They
are.
should be.
And this is a game for them to get back on track against a lackluster Jacksonville team on their home field. So yeah, Chargers all the way there.
Yeah, and they're lacking. I mean, Derwin James obviously out. Melvin Ingram has been banged up. I think they need a little bit more corner help there in LA for the Chargers. And then Austin Eckler, their star running back, is out again, and they're going to have Joshua Kelly and Justin Jackson kind of fill into those spots there. But I still expect Jacksonville not really to put up much resistance. The final 425 game is Chiefs Broncos, which on the surface level looks like a blowout. But given the way Denver's defense has been playing, given the way that we've seen Kansas City let division teams like Las Vegas this season kind of beat them, I'm still going to take Kansas City, but I think this game can end up actually being closer than it is. Patrick Mahomes, really the only game he seems like he's clicked is that Baltimore game this season. He's had some kind of weird performances where he has not been there. I will say, though, that in the rain last week against Buffalo, it didn't make any sense for him to be throwing the ball 40, 45, 50 times. They went with a great game plan outside of Andy Reid's kind of culture and kind of what his kind of mantra is. They ran the ball down Buffalo's throat. I think this could be another game of a very balanced attack. Are we getting Bell in this game, or is he going to be for next week? Is he going to play in this game? That's what I'm
You know,
wondering.
I don't know about that. I don't know if we
I
have
will look. I
confirmation.
will look that up while you give me your take on the game.
All right. Well, my take is that it's going to be a Chiefs Sunday, and I just have a feeling the Chiefs offense is going to explode in this game. And I know the Broncos defense has been playing well. We talked about last week their good performance in New England, holding them to 12 points. But I just think this is a game where the Chiefs get the offense back going, clicking on all cylinders. It's a big game for Patrick Mahomes. All the weapons there. Edwards Alaire, who the pronunciation, there seems to be a mix up on that. Apparently, it's Edwards Alaire now. People have got that wrong at the start of the
Oh,
year, but
Alaire instead of
whatever.
Hilaire.
Right, exactly. But he had a big game, as you talked about, with them going more with the running game in Buffalo, 160 yards rushing, whatever it might have been. But I think this is a game. I think the Chiefs are scoring at least 30 points in this game. I don't think it's going to be all that close. I know it's a division and the Denver defense playing well, but I just get the idea the Chiefs get the offense really revved up, and
Yeah.
it's a big win for Kansas City.
Yeah, and the issue with Denver is it just seems like right now they just don't have. They have a lack of offense. There's not enough offensive production there, especially to keep up with the likes of Kansas City. Andy Reid said that there's a possibility Bell could get a couple snaps, but right now with him learning the playbook, we don't expect him to kind of be too much in there. So maybe Clyde Edwards, Alaire or whatever it is said, he's going to be kind of the tout back going forward, at least for this week. The Sunday night game, which remember got flip flopped. So this game, Seattle and Arizona, was actually at 4:25, and they flip flopped a little bit here. So they take the Sunday night game, which I actually think is going to shape up to be a really, really good Sunday night game. I'm taking
Yeah.
Seattle to continue to stay undefeated, but I think this game is going to be really good. It's just Russell Wilson has owned Arizona. He's only lost to them one time in his career, and that was his first NFL start ever. Otherwise, he's always, always, always beaten Arizona and usually beats them pretty well. Although over the years they've had some pretty close games, especially in Seattle. Arizona has played them pretty well. But I'm taking them. I just don't think Kyler Murray and Arizona are there quite yet. But the player to highlight in this game is Budda Baker, the safety over there in Arizona. He has been a stud, and what a star, a superstar he is turning into. We've seen that against Dallas last Monday night. I think that will continue. But what Russell Wilson is doing this season is fantastic. It's only been done a few other times, and he kind of had a down game against Minnesota a couple weeks ago when we seen him play. I expect him to bounce back and kind of lead this offense in a great way. Do they get Josh Gordon back this season? Maybe, sorta. Seattle was another one of these teams that looked poised to sign Antonio Brown and then ended up not going it. But at the trade deadline, this team should look to get a defensive player over there because this defense is bad in Seattle.
Yeah, and Jamal Adams hasn't really helped much because
Has
of
been
his
hurt.
own injury issues, right? So, yeah, going to be a fun game to watch. This matchup always seems to be interesting. There was a game Sunday night between these two teams within the last couple of years that I remember had a wild finish where they both missed like chip shot field goals. It was
Yes.
and ended in a tie.
Yeah, yeah.
So it was a late season game that was memorable. But to watch these two quarterbacks go head to head with their skill sets, Wilson and Kyler Murray, is going to be special to watch. But I'm with you. It's a Seattle Sunday night for me. What Russell Wilson's been able to do playing at MVP level. You mentioned that game against Minnesota wasn't his best, and yet he still rallied and came from behind to
Yeah.
win that game. The
You just
great
know he's
drive
gonna.
late. Yeah, and the touchdown pass right at the buzzer to beat Minnesota. What was a great game. So I think he keeps the roll going, and I'm taking Seattle.
Yeah, and that game originally, the Sunday night game, was supposed to be Tampa Bay and Las Vegas. Las Vegas, especially on their offensive line, has had a massive outbreak of COVID. So the NFL wanted to ensure that there was going to be a Sunday night game this week. So that's why they flip flopped both of those games in case that the Tampa Bay Las Vegas game had to be canceled. The final game, as a Rams fan, and as the Monday night game, Chicago at LA.
You're not
Chicago,
going against your team in
I
this one,
am.
are
I'm
you?
taking the Bears.
Oh my goodness.
I'm taking the Bears just because, for some reason, even though last season the Rams did beat Chicago in the Sean McVay era, Chicago has just kind of been a little bit of his kryptonite, along with San Francisco and Jimmy Garoppolo. He just seems like we do not play well, and even in the win last year, we didn't really play well at all against Chicago. We had, remember, in the run to the Super Bowl, kind of the cracks that started showing for this LA team was when they lost 15-6 on I believe it was a Sunday night game in
Yep.
Chicago. So they don't seem to solve this Bears defense that well with a lot of their 11 personnel offense, even though they've transitioned more back to not three wide receiver sets. It's really been more of a kind of a T formation, two tight end offense in LA. But I want the Rams to win so bad. I'll be rooting for them every second. But I just don't expect Jared Goff to solve this defense. And even though I don't really respect Chicago's offense as well. Nick Foles has had one interception in every that he has made this season, which is not great. And this offense doesn't have a lot of pieces. But I expect them to make one play at the end, and maybe the Rams kind of turn it over, or Goff throws a pick six. And so I'm taking Chicago in that vaunted Bears defense.
Well, the Bears are 5-1, but there seems to be the idea out there of just how good they are at
Yeah,
5-1. They've
it's a
kind of
question.
pulled some games out of the fire, like that Atlantic game. It's been kind of a weird year for them, already making the quarterback change and not always exactly knowing what you're going to get from Foles and that offense as a whole. Yes, they played consistently good defense, but you just wonder, is this team for real, even with the record at 5-1? I think this is a game where your football team is going to get things
I hope
going.
so.
I'm going with the Rams. I think we're going to see their offense look functional. Goff working off play action, using his weapons. Cooper Cup, those tight ends that he has there. Higbee's really become a nice player. So I think the Rams at home, just because we don't quite know what the Bears are, even at 5-1. And I know you've mentioned in years past they haven't always had their best performances. I think that streak ends, and at home here, I think they bounce back and get a win.
Yeah, I hope so. I think it's important to point out two things. I don't think we know what the Rams are. Their 4 wins against the dreaded NFC East. And even though they've
Yeah,
been in the games against Buffalo that they should have won, and that San Francisco game was actually a little bit closer than the score actually dictates because Cooper Kupp is the other point I want to make, has not played well this season. He's been dropping uncharacteristically passes he never drops. He dropped a touchdown last week that we ended up then
yeah.
going for it on 4th and goal, and Goff threw the interception when I think we should have just settled for 3 points because that would have changed the game. But that touchdown would have completely changed the game. He just outright dropped it, and he needs to play better. This offense needs to play better, and they need to get this running game going against a really good front seven in Chicago. And so that's why I'm taking Chicago. But if they could play better and they could win this game, then I can get a little bit more of a clearer image of what this team is going to be here in 2020 until they win a game outside of the NFC East.
All right, so should be a pretty good week. Amazingly, that we're already at week 7. I mean, is there
I
any season that goes faster than the NFL? It's
No,
unbelievable.
and it's the season I think, at least for me, and probably for you too. I look forward to the most. We watch a lot of other sports here, but man, there's just something about the NFL that kind of brings people together, and it's just a great sport to watch. It just goes so fast. It does. The teams to mention on the bye this week: Baltimore, Miami, Minnesota, and Indianapolis. All 4 of those teams are on the bye, so we'll touch on them for next week. But guys, that's going to wrap us up here for another great podcast, our 4th podcast here of First and 10. Thank you very much for joining us. If you've watched to the end of this very long podcast that we've had this week, thank you very
I guess we
much.
had a lot to cover.
We had a lot to cover. These have kind of become bi-weekly just because of our work schedules. We'll try maybe to get more back to weekly. We'll try maybe to get back to being in person and not remote. But I think remote actually has worked out pretty well. Definitely better than I think we've both expected. Brian, thank you for joining me on this very late hour here on Saturday into Sunday night. Any closing thoughts?
It was a lot of fun, and I had here as the backdrop the World Series Game 4, which I mentioned briefly, but was just a fascinating back and forth game that the Rays end up winning, and now the series tied 2-2. So I think we're in for a great finish. Just a quick baseball note, because I'm generally good for one of those.
Absolutely. Brian is a huge baseball fan. He does also a weekly baseball show that you could follow him on Twitter at, what's your Twitter handle, Brian?
Oh, it's just my personal handle, nothing fancy, just my name at Brian Gadsworth. But the show is called Brian on Baseball, so you can look out for that each week as
Yeah,
well.
definitely, guys. If you are a baseball fan, this man is extremely knowledgeable in baseball. One of the best people I know in that sport. So definitely check that out. He's great. And we're shaping up for hopefully a great finish to the World Series in baseball. The way that playoffs is gone, hopefully we could get something like that in the NFL in this COVID kind of weird season. We can get just as great games and a great championship as baseball seemingly is providing. Guys, thank you so much once again for watching. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, share with your friends if you be so kind. We'll be back hopefully this week, coming next week, for week 7 here. If not, we'll be back in a couple weeks for kind of this bi-weekly show we've had here on First and 10. But thank you so much. Comment down below any thoughts, predictions you have. And until next time, guys, thanks for watching.